My name is Trisha Park. I am the Associate Director of Cleaver Workshops here at Cleaver Magazine. Welcome to Cleaver Magazine's 47th issue contributors reading. We're so excited to have all of you here. In addition to our normal selection of people, our pool of people to pull from for this reading, we also are super excited to present to you the winners of our creative nonfiction contest that was judged by Clifford Thompson, who will be our final reader as well. He was our gracious and wonderful and very thoughtful creative nonfiction contest judge. And before we get started, I'm just going to pass it over to Karen Ryle, who is Cleaver's founding editor-in-chief.
Hello, everyone, and welcome all of you to our issue number 47 contributors reading. My name is Karen Ryle. Yes, those are fried eggs in my ears, and I'm the co-founding and chief editor of Cleaver. 2024 marks our 11th year as a magazine in this world. We published our first full issue in March 2013. For those of you not familiar with Cleaver, we are a quarterly literary magazine. We publish fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, and flash every March, June, September, and December. We also publish book reviews, craft essays, interviews, and a weekly newsletter where we send out writing tips by our contributors, staff, and community of readers. It's a super popular feature, so check it out and consider writing a tip for Cleaver. In addition, we host a workshop and masterclass series, which I hope you will also check out. Next Sunday afternoon, senior fiction editor Andrea Caswell will present a live interactive Zoom masterclass on the art of revision. If you can't make it, no worries. We send a recording to all registrants. You can also check out our live upcoming masterclasses and recorded classes on the website. And our latest feature, which we're calling Ass in Chair Sessions, it's a cheeky new monthly communal 90-minute commitment to your own writing practice, just $5 a session or $15 to come to 4 of them. About our name, cleave is a Janus word, also known as an auto-antonym, meaning both itself and its opposite. To cleave is both to stick tight and to fall away. A cleaver is the most broad-edged and brutally efficient kitchen knife, designed to be swung like a hammer for the most effective channel of force. Cleave also means to come together with strong attachment. Cleaver runs its literary magazine on 100% volunteer labor, with many fine editors whose invaluable contributions make our magazine possible. Shout out to our senior creative nonfiction editor, Sydney Temerine, who's joining us today as well. I serve as head fiction editor, webmaster, graphic designer, chief cook and bottle washer. So the buck stops here if you have any Cleaver related issues. And speaking of issues, I'm tremendously proud of issue 47 with its sparkling collection of talented writers. Thanks to all of you for your enthusiasm and support and for trusting us as stewards of your work. Take it away, Trisha.
We're going to start with Michael Czyzniejewski. Michael is the author of 4 collections of stories, most recently The Amnesiac in the Maze from Braddock Avenue Books in 2023. He serves as editor-in-chief of Moon City Press and Moon City Review, as well as interviews as the editor of Smokelung Quarterly. He's received a fellowship from the National Endowment of the Arts and 2 Pushcart Prizes. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Trisha and Karen, for having me, and for everybody for honoring me with your work and having it in the issue. It's a really exciting time. I'm going to read my work. It's a flash fiction piece, and it's going to go pretty quickly. This is called Her Heart Was a Chipmunk. She said her heart was a chipmunk, said it on our first date. I figured she was being poetic, saying something like, my heart is a chipmunk, to mean she herself was like a chipmunk, perhaps on the inside, or that she just really liked chipmunks. When we hit it off, got serious, I started to see it, at least in my head. She was skittish. She climbed well. She enjoyed nuts. But then one day we were lounging on her sofa and she was like, hold on. And then she took off her shirt and I was like, all right, here we go. And I took off my shirt, but she said, what are you doing? And I said, just following your lead. And she says, oh, no, but I see why you think that. Then she reached between her bra cups and pressed into her sternum like it was a button, which made her chest open, a little door flipping ajar, and out came a chipmunk, reddish brown and speckled. It leapt from the threshold onto the floor and disappeared. It likes to run around, she said. Her little door shut automatically and she put on her shirt. I fumbled into my shirt, keeping watch for the chipmunk for her heart. I heard it under the couch, on the countertop, rummaging through a cabinet. I couldn't relax. Meanwhile, she'd flipped on the game show where contestants sketch pictures based on clues given to them by celebrities. The winner then has their image tattooed somewhere on their body, audience's choice. My cousin had been on season 6 and now had a tramp stamp of a pistachio with Bob Marley dreads. The chipmunk hearted woman said she wanted to be a contestant, win a little tattooed door over her actual heart door so everyone could see it when she went to the beach, or when I'm with someone special. With that, she took her shirt back off, her bra too, and put her fingers to her mouth, whistling. The chipmunk, its cheek stuffed, came running. She poked into her sternum and the door opened, and the fat cheek chipmunk jumped inside, the door shutting behind it. The woman said, "Now is when you follow my lead," so I took off my shirt. She pressed into my sternum, but nothing happened. "Sorry," I said. Then she kissed the spot where she poked and said, "Just wait."
Up next, we have one of our contestants for our creative nonfiction contest. Marj Hahne is one of our finalists. Marj is a freelance editor, writer, and writing teacher, and a 2015 MFA graduate from the Rainier Writing Workshop in Poetry. She has performed and taught at over 100 venues across the country, including public radio and television programs. Her poems have appeared in literary journals, anthologies, art exhibits, and dance performances. To make poetry hospitable, she reads poems to dogs and pairs poems with craft beers, spirits, and coffee for her YouTube channel. Please welcome Marj.
I guess this is maybe like a kind of a mosaic kind of essay. It's called Fragments for an Identical Twin. Cleave ends with leave. Let's begin there, because there includes here. Whenever you leave, I sense my own absence. Right before the last time you left, you screamed, "You got what you wanted. I'm here, aren't I?" I thought, whose presence is this? Is yours mine? Cleave, V1, to split. Cleave, V2, to adhere firmly or loyally. You, the firstborn, B1, first to press your feathery head into mom's cervix. I, B2, kicked you out of the womb, a clairvoyant said, because I needed some space, 4 weeks in an incubator at Booth Memorial Hospital. In the next box over, you hit 5 pounds in half the time, so Dr. Lewis let mom take you home. My heart and lungs opened alone. Mom would press her face against the window of the neonatal unit while a nurse wheeled my hatchery over. 10 more ounces for freedom, something to pump and wail for. A drink or a fuck is a kind of swaddling to keep my limbs from flailing, to there, my heart. Through a stethoscope, whooshes between beats, an innocent murmur, a livable turbulence in my blood. To calm the fuck down, I do yoga. Pigeon, happy baby, corpse, most challenging because it's total relaxation. Puts the shh in Shavasana. Lying still on the mat, I cry, all that oming and eyeing, working inside out. One twin needs the other twin more, or so I read in One and the Same, written by journalist Abigail Pogrebin after her identical twin Robin pulled away in adulthood. In high school, my locker was next to yours, and because we had the same scheduled junior year, we dressed up as conjoined twins for Halloween. We shouldered into Dad's roomiest sweatshirt, my right arm in the right sleeve, your left arm in the left sleeve, and braided our hair into a tail. Our legs were our own, but walking down the hall, we had to lean on each other. Traveling as one unit was easy for us, winners of the 3-legged race during Groton Elementary field days. Binding our inside legs at the ankle, we trained in our sky-sized yard. Sights set straight ahead, we counted towards synchronized flight. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Alone in the dark, I fell for birds at the Fall Creek Theater, Winged Migration. Writer-director Jacques Perrin's opening line like pillow talk. The story of bird migration is the story of promise, a promise to return. I'd been home at mom's after vacating my Manhattan sublet. The body knows when it's time to go. When I drove the 1,700 miles to Colorado, 7 thousandths of the way to the moon, I put the double V in verve. not an echo, but a single sound leaving and returning. I nod off at the opera. Does the there of hovering song make me drowsy, or does the rapid eye movement from surtitle screen to stage to surtitle screen make my brain think it's dreaming? Poet Levi premiered here at the Central City Opera House. One night, poet, exiled on a houseboat, converses with his muses, wine and moon, about his life, his fall from grace. The ways open as the sky, I alone cannot fly. Later, moon beseeches him, why not go home now? When poet reaches out to embrace her celestial body, he disappears into the dark. That's moon's reflection in water, sings poem, a reversal of sky. When mom's water broke 7 weeks early, Dr. Lewis took an x-ray of her belly. You don't have one baby in there, Norma. You have 2 babies in there. Wriggling to be born under the sign of the twins, we put the E in preemie. Lounging under the sparkling dome of the Southern Cayuga Planetarium during the annual middle school field trip, I couldn't wait for the astronomer to progress the sky through the zodiac constellations. Gemini overhead, he'd ask, do we have any twins in here? Our classmates pointed at us. When were you born, he'd ask. May 27th, we'd answer. My, you're true Geminis. We put the win in twins. When anyone asks what's it like to be a twin, I say, I don't want to leave you in death, and I don't want to be left. The Aldabra rail lives again on 4 coral islands in the Indian Ocean after the atoll it first evolved on vanished under the sea 136,000 years ago. Why didn't these birds lift off from the flooding earth to save themselves? Well, no predators had inhabited the atoll, so their wings became vestigial. When the sea dropped 36,000 years later, the flightless rails reappeared on the atoll, putting the Ra in iterative evolution. Being born 2 minutes after you makes me a kind of iteration, but that isn't why I left. The body knows when it's time to land.
Next up, we have Jane Feinsod. Jane is a poet and educator living and working in Philadelphia. She received her MFA from UMass Amherst, where she was named a Rose Fellow. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Redivider, maybe, Phoebe, the Arkansas International, and elsewhere. Welcome, Jane.
I'm going to read, I believe, 2 poems. First one is called Apology. And what of the child killed in a bathroom? And what of the others? Sorting the bookshelf and bleaching the tub. I worry I'm tumored. I mean that. In socks, watching dog walkers. And what of the dead am I to do? I dread most things. Holidays and poverty. My mother comes to mind. I'm big enough for that. And what if the gone, not given shelter in ceramics and suburban closets? Grief is informative. Maybe so. What consolation could this be? So it is thundering after all. Call me voyeur, call me cloistered, if the habit fits. Make midnight coffee, stay up to witness, and what of it now? Right, and then finish off with another short little poem that's not quite as much of a bummer. It's called New Career in Flowers. Dried out of words and dulled by the work, I'm thinking about a new career in flowers. There's a future in it if you squint. You'll see it in an orchid. You'll see it in purple going yellow. I could go on, keep teaching Aristotle to children. Or I could bend eucalyptus to my liking, drip the leaves over newspaper, string hydrangea stems on chicken wire, arrange bouquets of blue hyacinth, larkspur, clematis. I've been brutish, but I can change, like anything, like the meaning of anthology, once gathered flowers. I've been harsh, but I can dulce it. I'll deliver with care. I'll make good with fragile and quiet things. I'll point out pistils on lilies to my loyal customers. I'll scold couples in want of wedding bouquet preservation. You can't put your roses in resin and expect them to live.
Up next, we have Sarah Carson, who is another one of our finalists for our Creative Nonfiction Prize. Sarah is the author of several poetry collections, including How to Baptize a Child in Flint, Michigan, out in 2022, and winner of the 2021 Lexi Rudnitsky Editor's Choice Award from Persea Books. She is currently at work on a memoir about single motherhood, work, and the rules that govern the universe. Welcome, Sarah.
I'm going to read my piece. My daughter's school is closed after another mass shooting in America. So I drive us to the zoo in the closest faraway place. And as she skips down the path to the primate house, the entire savannah is her libretto, hook, line, and dirge. This morning, she asked what could shutter a city so suddenly, and I refused to explain how our species does what others will not do. That a macaque uses a rock to shuck an oyster, but she'll eat what she finds there. What she doesn't need will feed the next creature. Now in the primate house, we watch a whole chimp colony laze in its make-believe forest. The oldest chimp, Bubbles, makes her way toward the one-way glass on tender hips, sits with her back to us, and I remember a news report from some other Tuesday's violence. How the gunman approached an office worker from behind, her earbuds blaring, and she fell forward onto her desktop, never hearing her coworker's screams. That's how I'd like to go, I thought then. No time for fear, no time for choosing, but that was before I was a mother, halved like an avocado, spread like an epidemic. Now everywhere I go, I see white men with AK-47s, white men walking in and out of sporting goods stores. At my daughter's preschool field day, a teacher asked me to fill a 10-gallon tub with yellow sugar and water. And I thought of the morning my sister and I sold lemonade to construction workers, white men with hard hats, white men with jackhammers, white men pushing and shoving in my childhood driveway, while a police captain who taught us the Pledge of Allegiance trained his sidearm on our cousins' uncles, our dads. Which comes first, the chicken or the person tasked with subduing the chicken, the primate or the prisoner? Bubbles, a volunteer tells us, is not just a mother, but a grandmother, a great-grandmother. And as she scratches her back on a concrete post, a video behind her insists if she was not here, she would have perished at the hands of poachers. I think she looks exhausted, but maybe it's me who's still learning what it means to be upright, to roll the die of the future. That to be tired is a symptom, but not a diagnosis. That the cage is the only cure we can conjure. A half-life just big enough to feel both wild and safe.
Up next, we have Cassie Burkhardt. Cassie lives in Gladwin, Pennsylvania. You can find more of her writing in Rattle, New Ohio Review, Sad Girls, Philadelphia Stories, Kajabine, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and other journals. Cassie is currently writing a poetry chapbook called Ode to My Minivan, and she studies with the poet Phil Schultz at the Writer's Studio. Please welcome Cassie.
All right, so here's some nonfiction flash about my kids. This one is called Mud Kitchen. Dirt is the bane of my existence, but my kids love it. Can't resist it. Never met a mud puddle they didn't immediately want to wade in barefoot. All I see is laundry. We live in woodsy Pennsylvania, so they have plenty of access to the stuff. I like snow. I love sand, which wipes clean. They love mud. Their favorite game is Mud Kitchen. Give them a forgotten plastic spoon, teacups, Tupperware containers, access to a hose, and voila, 2 hours of entertainment. I'm watching them from the kitchen window right now as I boil pasta for dinner at the stove. Perched behind the trampoline, my son is folding a leaf taco with mud hot sauce for an appetizer, stirring a silty stew with mud meatballs as the main course, and for dessert, my daughters emerge from the playhouse with various mud cakes decorated with flower petals, baby pine cones, and fern fronds. They're breathlessly directing each other as if on a movie set, sweating and half naked, even though it's October, full of ideas, filthy dirty. I sigh, pour myself a giant glass of wine, try to understand, to remember. Did I love mud as a kid? I mean, I must have, right? The oozy squish between fingers and toes, the velvety thickness of it, the creamy malleability of it as an artistic medium, clay-like, chocolatey. Did I too admire the versatility of these two simple ingredients, dirt and water? Did I paint my face with it? Ella does. Paints it on her eyelids, her lips, says she likes the taste of it. All right, give me a mud makeover too, I say, wandering out to the backyard with my glass of wine. Really? She laughs, paints my lips with her fingers. I pucker up, kiss Ella, then lick my mud lips, laughing. Yuck! I have to say, it tastes vaguely familiar, which makes me happy. I guess I haven't forgotten the taste of joy after all. It tastes creamy, wet, gritty, with a hint of rain, mica, fern roots, worm. A Michelin star worthy earth soup, I tell her. I laugh again, wipe my lips and head back inside to jot this down. 5 more minutes, okay guys? Then I'm hosing you down.
Up next, we have Cameron MacKenzie. Cameron's work has appeared in Salmagundi, Plume, Cut Bank, and the Michigan Quarterly Review, among other places. Kirkus Reviews called his first novel the beginning of his excellent and eventful career, original, poignant, brutal, and beautiful. His collection of short fiction, River Weather, was praised by the Rumpus as riveting. His book of flash fiction is forthcoming from Alternating Current Press. He lives and works in Roanoke, Virginia. Welcome.
This piece is it's a piece of flash called Catsuit, and it's one of these that when I started writing flash, I just started to think of all the strange things that had happened to me and what I could do with it. And this one, it's all true, and it came out pretty quick, almost in one shot. So this is Catsuit. Every time Allie's mom's boyfriend fed his ball python, he played Mouth for War by Pantera. My friend Tyler and I would squat beside the snake's aquarium under the hot light and watch the little mouse as it scampered through the wood chips. The poor thing ran one way and then the other, trying to figure out where he was, while the snake lifted his head and flicked out its tongue. The thing about Pantera is the clarity of the mix. Every instrument is clean and aligned with no fuzz or mud or sloppy transitions. You've got Phil Anselmo screaming, Dimebag Darrell guitar dive bombing, and Vinnie Paul on drums like a platoon of Gatling guns. You can feel the serrated shapes of every sound back up in your gums. I wondered if the mouse could hear it while he nosed the glass walls. It didn't even occur to me if the snake could, unwinding itself as it did, moving less like an animal and more like an intestine removed and placed inside of a box. I dated Allie the year before, in 7th grade. Dated, meaning we'd held hands regularly in the halls. I was so chock full of hormones I could barely speak when she touched me. At night after dinner, I refused to take her calls and sat shaking on the living room couch with the expectation of what she might suggest or demand or require. When she showed up one day at Seneca Ridge Middle School in a black catsuit, I was apoplectic. I couldn't look her in the eye. I was ashamed for her and for myself and appalled that every movement she made in her chair gripped at that new thing I had been hiding in the back of my chest. But I gathered myself, swallowed all the noise, and, after biology, I placed my hand, gingerly and with great terror, on the rounded undercurve of her ass. I patted that tensile rump like a sausage in the casing, and as I did so, Allie looked up at me, and she smiled. But it wasn't enough. She broke up with me a few weeks later, meaning she was holding hands with another boy, which was, to me, in all honesty, an enormous relief. The snake moved around the mouse like a snake would, wide and behind and to the right, and the mouse still wasn't any wiser, its little paw pads pressed up against the glass. I was looking at the mouse's 2 small and crenulated and perfect teeth that I realized could have only been formed by the alien decision of a larger mind when the snake jerked up and around like a whip and then rolled, the wood chips scattering, the mouse snatched, removed, caught up in the rolling green spiral that knocked stupidly against the back of the glass. Phil kept screaming and Dimebag Darrell dropped down from the heights as the snake bore in, and Allie's mom's boyfriend and my buddy Tyler both shouted at once, "Look at his balls," they said, pointing at the rear end of the mouse that stuck out from the coils. "They're huge. They're going to pop, dude. His balls are going to pop." But I knew they weren't. I knew there was something that would come in right at the last possible second and put a stop to it.
Up next, we have another one of our creative nonfiction contest finalists, Freesia McKee. Freesia writes about place, gender, and genre through poetry, prose, book reviews, and literary criticism. Recent work appears in Fugue, About Place Journal, Porterhouse Review, and her newest chapbook, Hummingbird Vows. She's an assistant professor of English at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Welcome, Freesia.
So this is a lyric essay that is in 49 very small sections. I'm going to read about 35 of them. Tender experiments we could conduct together or alone, after Tyler Friend. We could go to Quick Trip at 9 p.m. and pretend to shop while flirting over chicken tenders and red Gatorade. We could have a theoretical debate and a duel. Some of us is imaginary, some of us is true. I continue dating only people who've owned motorcycles or are considering purchasing a motorcycle. I never join Tinder, but pretend we met on Tinder. You play out the script we're co-writing as we sit on bar stools in Madison. Because I find it romantic, I tell you on our road trip about bisexual epistemologies. 1,000 nights in this town, and none of them completely with you. In my apartment, you say, you have the most amazing book collection of anyone I've ever met, and it's the sexiest compliment I've ever heard. Instead of having sex, we look at books. We recreate our first date 24 times, kissing along different places on the hiking trail. The backs of my knees on your shoulders, you bookmark me. We recite Edna St. Vincent Millay under the full moon and stars we barely name. I hover between your chin and ear, resizing, a nocturnal hummingbird. After I break up with you, I transcribe the 40 pages of poetry I wrote during our brief relationship. I swallow every riverboat adjacent to this river town, and it works less well each time. Is the catchphrase love wins another false promise of happily ever after? I show up for a nightcap at your house. We sit in the cold and you smoke. We glue our palms together like performance artists from the 80s. This way, I think, you can never leave me, though I am the one leaving. I wrestle back the genre of small town love story from Hallmark movies and country songs. I view the city dwelling love poem as somehow more progressive than a love poem that takes place in a town. I forget when I leave to pay for my beer. Netflix's binge watchability cockblocks me. People don't go out anymore. We once put your TV on wheels. I unfurled a half-mile of orange extension cord from my mouth. I pull into a gas station and cry on the phone about how much I miss you. I see your Volkswagen on Highway 10 while I'm parked on the phone crying about how much I miss you. I drive to the town of Scandinavia via golden country roads. Adrian Lenker sings, and I weep about you on Main Street. I want more than it is fair to ask. You build a fire in your backyard. I toss in drafts of old poems. Lesbian bookmarks keep my places in the lesbian poetry books I read to forget about you. In our breakup conversation, we debate whether or not I am visibly queer. I make a list of every one of our dates, and I annotate it with terms like lovely, sublime, mutually enjoyable, and disastrous. As if I will never see you again, I write down every detail. And I'm dramatic. We both live in a town of 28,000 people. So I look up census data to see how many people in the county are around my age, then subtract the percentage of married people and Republicans and attempt at carving out my dating pool. I think of your palms on my back, like your hand pressing the top of my shoulder towards you, and I shiver in pleasure. I consider joining Tinder, but I'm not sure if our breakup is a good reason to join Tinder. I dream we're driving without seatbelts. I dream I'm burning my house down. I dream you are your friend. We walk to the bowling alley as I realize I'm wearing another woman's coat. You say you almost never cry. From my second floor window, I cry enough for the whole block, every neighbor walking their dog or shoveling snow.
Up next, we have David L. Updike. David's work has appeared or is forthcoming in Chicago Quarterly Journal, Philadelphia Stories, Hobart, Daily Science Fiction, 365 Tomorrows, Journey, the Journal of Imaginative Literature, and the anthologies Summer of Sci-Fi and Fantasy Volume 2, Flash of the Dead, and The Dancing Plague, a collection of utter speculation. David lives in Philadelphia, where he runs the publications program at an art museum. Welcome, David.
I'm going to read about the first half of my story because it's too long for 6 minutes, and you'll just have to read the rest in Cleaver if you care to. So it's called Reunion. My kindergarten class's 50th reunion is underway. It's being hosted by our classmates, Mike Finnegan and Linda Haupt, who ended up dating in high school and getting married shortly after graduation. They're now grandparents and live in the house where she grew up, just a few blocks from Shanksville Elementary. Mike and Linda have outfitted their backyard for the occasion. There's a collage station with construction paper, safety scissors, and Elmer's glue, and a music table piled with tambourines, maracas, and recorders. Those of us feeling less hands-on gather beneath the rented canopy in the middle of the yard, where folding chairs are arranged in a semicircle on a large rectangular rug. A single empty chair sits facing the others in honor of our dearly departed teacher, Miss Mushlitz, who passed some years ago. Per the invitation, we've surrendered our cell phones to our hosts upon arrival. Our generation predates the digital revolution, and we are, for today at least, proud of this fact. We can be proud, too, that we've achieved 100% attendance for our class of 18, with people coming from as far away as Georgia and Michigan to celebrate this, our golden reunion. As one of those who went away for college and never came back, I find each individual reunion with my former classmates a vertiginous leap across time, as my memory of their 6-year-old self hurtles forward to meet the middle-aged adult in front of me. The name tags are helpful for some, but others are instantly recognizable. Tom Muldoon, for instance, whose shoulder-length blonde curls have evaporated, but whose dimpled chin, hawk nose, and infectious laugh have only sharpened with age. He's some kind of local dignitary now, town councilman or such, and does a lot of backslapping as he makes the rounds. Or Betsy Coombs, my secret kindergarten crush, whose steel blue eyes, staged by curtains of straight black hair, still freeze me in my tracks. She comes over and greets me, and I manage to frame a question without falling flat on my face, in answer to which she informs me that she is now chair of philosophy at a school in the Midwest. Of course she is, I think. She was always the smartest one. She asked me about my work, and I feel myself flush. Why, I don't know. Urologist is a perfectly honorable and necessary profession. But nevertheless, my eyes drop as I respond, noting on the way down that neither of us is wearing a ring. Others have not fared so well. Something is going on with Susie Schaefer, for example. She and Frank Rossich are the other married couple to emerge from our kindergarten cohort. Frank is a genial middle-aged version of the kid I remember, but Susie has acquired some kind of physical anomaly that has caused her body to shrink to the size of a child's, while her head remains adult size. Frank carries her in the crook of his arm like a ventriloquist doll, and everyone fawns over her as they would a newborn. "You look adorable, Susie," says Deborah McCready. "Look at those little tootsies," says Julie Barstow, squeezing the toe of her canvas sneaker. "Oh, look, swings," says Susie, and off they go. We watch as Frank lowers her onto the seat, then begins to push her from behind. Higher, she squeals, higher. That's so lovely, says Betsy. Yes, lovely, I say, though I'm not sure that's the word I would have used. I guess she means that they've stuck it out through whatever this is, and if anything, they seem even more in love. I wonder what Betsy's story is. We attempt to make small talk, but what do you ask a philosophy professor that doesn't sound stupid before it even comes out? And what do you ask a urologist that isn't embarrassing? Seen any nice urethras lately? You pick up things right where you left off with a person, regardless of how much time has elapsed in between. At least that's my experience. So we watch Frank push Susie, who soars above the top of the swing, the chain going slack at the top of each arc. Still, she demands to go higher. I turn to say something to Betsy, but she's moved on. I thread my way through the activity stations, not feeling much like joining in. I know that I belong here as much as anyone does, but there's a way in which I still feel apart. Was it like that even back then? I try to remember, but it's all a blur of birthdays and bloody noses, triumphs and humiliations. The time I hit Kevin Broadbeck in the face with a basketball, or when Betsy, on a dare from the other girls, planted a kiss on my cheek. The time I made the bus driver stop on the way home from a field trip so I could pee alongside the road. Miss Mushlitz told the rest of the class to look the other way, which of course they didn't, and then it was all anyone talked about for weeks afterwards. P.P. Polly, they called me. The time my mom didn't make any treats for the class on my birthday, so Miss Mushlitz took down the plaster cake from the top shelf of the closet, kept there for just such occasions, and the class sang Happy Birthday, the Boulder kids inserting P.P. before my name. Is that when our paths began to diverge, or does everyone carry their private humiliations through life like old scars? I stand at the back of the yard and look out over the fence. On the other side of the pointed wooden slats, the ground slopes sharply downward, a dizzying 100 feet or more, into an immense gravel pit. Tall slag heaps dot the landscape like anthills. I don't remember seeing this before. Mike, our co-host, appears at my side. How long has that been there, I ask. Oh, forever, more or less. It's been getting bigger lately. Whose is it? He shrugs. Everybody's, nobody's. It's none of my business, really. I have enough to deal with just keeping all this up, he says, gesturing toward the yard and the house. How about you, Paul? You married? Have any kids? No, I say, not me. I was married, but no kids. Linda is standing by the back door, ringing a brass bell with a wooden handle. Snack time, she calls, and we all converge on the house.
Up next, we have Jen Murphy-Parker, who is our third prize winner of our creative nonfiction contest. And about this piece, our judge, Clifford Thompson, who's also reading tonight, says, like all good personal essays, this one brings the humility and wisdom of experience to bear on a look at a past self with sympathy for that self. The boy of the title rather is two people, one imagined by the narrator, the other left to us to imagine, which we can painfully. This is a sad and lovely work. Jen Murphy-Parker is a writer based in San Francisco, where she lives with her husband, 4 kids, and 0 dogs. She writes monthly long-form essays on her Substack, exploring what exists in the middle of parenting, of health, of life. 14 years into raising a child with severe epilepsy, she's always looking for the bothness, the many ways we end up as some of our best and worst luck and experiences. She holds a master's from Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, and her work has appeared in Hobart Pulp and High Mat Review, among others. Welcome, Jen.
I'll be reading How a Boy Could Be. I never wanted Lou to die. Of course I didn't. I would have died for him. I would have died if he died. But that didn't mean I could understand how he was supposed to live, or that I had any confidence he'd continue doing so for any meaningful amount of time. If Lou had died at 9 months, something he'd come dangerously close to doing, we would have never known his genetic truth. We would have concluded that our milestone-hitting, giggling, connected bulb of a boy had been downed by a virus. A fluke, a tragedy. RSV, which he had, blocks and clogs narrow infant airways. It could have killed him. An ICU nurse told me it probably would on the night of his first great emergency. We'd landed on a hospital rooftop by helicopter because of a 50-minute seizure. a seizure that would have been a footnote to the big bad illness of RSV, a seizure that would have been considered a small body's reasonable reaction to highest fever and too little oxygen. We would have never known Lou's small body was hardwired for this reaction, whether he was profoundly ill or not. If he died, I would have grieved a different boy than the one he'd turn out to be by living. I would have designed an alternate, an other Lou, that perfect baby ripped from his promising and typical path. I was still so simple then. I knew nothing of how much could go wrong while still living. My happiness binary was still governed by survival. Alive equaled happy, and quite obviously dead equaled unhappy. I didn't possess the mental tools to build a scenario in which Lou lived a compromised life of seizures, pharmaceuticals, and disabilities. That outcome was a complicated high-rise. I lived in a Lincoln log cabin I'd playfully assembled on the floor, notched and fitted just so. If Lou had died as a baby, we'd have been robbed of our scrappy youngest, our along for the ride forth, the exclamation mark to our family. We were going to be casual about this kid. We brought him to In-N-Out when he was just 5 days old to prove it, well before we thought much of his frequent shivering, well before we knew he had a problem that extra blankets could never solve. I took a bunch of pictures that night, Lou in an infant seat on the floor of a fast food restaurant, at the feet of his breezy, not sweating the small stuff family. I remember feeling so self-satisfied with the discovery that if you acted like child rearing was easy and no big deal, it was easy and no big deal. That other Lou would be the carefree kid eating Fritos for dinner in the bleachers at his brother's game or roaming the lobby during his sister's community theater musicals. I wouldn't have to watch him. I'd let other kids handle that. I'd know something about kids. Stuff rarely went that wrong. The whole enterprise was set up to work. And honestly, it was usually the kids who were helicoptered, who did fall, did get hurt, did get caught in whirring blades. That other Lou would bike all over town, coming home in one piece every time, whether he wore a helmet or not. He wouldn't. He'd be good at making pasta or a sandwich for himself, and he'd put his plate in the dishwasher every time. He'd do his own laundry, understanding that if you wanted something clean, you needed to clean it yourself. He'd barely have a curfew in high school. He wouldn't need it. He'd have so much freedom, he'd never buck up against us. Some nights he'd come home early just because he wanted to, squeezing in between us on the couch, bigger than both of us, always forgetting his size. He'd watch his siblings file out the door for college one every few years. He'd readjust to a different energy in the house with every departure, until as a sophomore in high school, he'd be the last kid home. Craving lost noise, he'd have friends rotating through our door. Half the time they'd stay for dinner, covering topics that would surely scandalize other parents. But he wouldn't care what his friends said in front of us. He'd have told us most of it before. Things like school and sports would come naturally to him, but he wouldn't be an asshole about it. He'd glide through his education as if he had wheels on his feet, and his hair, knowing life should be fun, would stay blonde. Later in relationships, he'd be a teddy bear kind of boyfriend, sensitive and nonplussed by anything a girl could throw at him. He'd run to the store for tampons, but first ask what absorbency she preferred, or if she wanted those sport ones, even though he'd think sport variety feminine protection was a marketing hoax for certain. He had 2 sisters. He knew living was a sport in and of itself. Sure, he might be a little territorial at the dinner table, but not in a jerky way. It would just be another endearing thing about him, scruffy and adorable at our giant Nora Ephron Thanksgivings. We'd laugh about how he'd lean over his plate, how he'd eat so fast. We'd never worried he'd choke. When Lou survived RSV, I thought this Lou, this coming soon to a theater near you Lou, this normally and excitingly developing Lou had survived. I was a young enough mother. I did not yet understand the folly of this kind of daydreaming about any kid. I hadn't yet learned that expecting anything past the 9 months of expecting would prove unexpectedly faulty over and over again. Isn't this what we do as parents? We hope and direct and believe we've laid our pattern on this freshly created cloth. Unaccustomed to this new and strange kind of sewing, we think as long as we pin and cut and stitch just so, we'll produce the garment we've imagined. We pretend how this garment turns out is up to us. We pretend this garment is ours.
Up next, we have Lori Miller Kase. Lori is a journalist, fiction writer, and essayist based in Simsbury, Connecticut. Her work has appeared in Literary Mama, The Atlantic, and the New York Times, among other publications. She has received several Excellence in Journalism awards from the Connecticut Society of Professional Journalists and the Letter Review Prize for Short Fiction. She studied creative writing at Wesleyan University, where she received her master's degree. Her recently completed novel, The Accident, was the young adult finalist for the Tassie Walden Awards for New Voices in Children's Literature. She's also working on a collection of linked short stories. Welcome, Lori.
I'm going to read a piece of flash nonfiction called Guarding the Nest. The robin eyes us from her nest. All it takes is a ruffling of the papers beside me to send her flying into the nearby redbud trees, angry wings flapping. I sit on the back porch, computer perched on my lap, typing quietly, trying not to move, willing my dog, who is lying against me, to remain still. It is my porch, yet I am the intruder. The robin is guarding her nest. My own nest is empty, so I prefer to be out here where I can see the tiny ballerina pink blossoms making their brief appearance on the redbud branches, where I can witness the slow climb of the not yet flowering rose bushes along the arbor beside my porch, where I can watch as each new bloom emerges in the garden beyond the arbor. It's May, so the bleeding hearts arch over delicate blue clouds of forget-me-nots. The speckled clumps of lungwort leaves are crowned with tiny lavender florets, and multicolored tulips rise from what will later become bountiful herb and vegetable beds. I remain on the porch, working and watching as the robin returns, perches on the nest, then swoops away, wings beating against her body, against the air, again and again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh in reproach. We didn't have this porch when my children were babies. There was no roof to offer shelter to nesting birds, no column capital on which a robin could set up home and incubate its young. Instead, there was a deck exposed to the elements, where my babies, in their floppy sun hats, sat at a miniature picnic table and dipped skinny paintbrushes into trays of water and color, where they played in a portable sandbox, creating castles and moats and tea party cakes. We sometimes saw foxes out back, so I stayed close, ever vigilant, guarding the nest. There weren't as many flowers back then. Instead, I watered and fed my babies, made sure they were exposed to sunlight. I nurtured them and watched them blossom. The robin appears more and more frequently, darting from tree to nest to tree. I can't see into the nest, but imagine several blue-green ellipses the color of a pale sky, or of my porch ceiling. I leave them be. I don't want the robin to abandon her babies. Still, I wonder how much longer before the eggs hatch, before the babies grow strong enough to leave the nest and fly into the garden, before we can remove her nest and I can reclaim my porch. I am annoyed by the robin, but I understand her.
Up next, we have Hart Vetter. Hart is a picture taker, green thinker, and avid dog walker in Nyack, New York. Recent work appeared in Across the Margin, Halfway Down the Stairs, Discretionary Love, Bull Men's Fiction, Workers' Right Journal, Literary Heist, and elsewhere. Welcome, Hart.
Slapped. Just let it rise, said Aaron. He'd had it. My son and I had schlepped over 24 filled buckets out the basement to the front door and dumped them down the driveway, mercifully slanted downhill toward the lone, pathetically outmaneuvered gully on my side of the street. The roadway had become a river again, as it was prone to do during torrential events, but nothing too bad if you didn't need to drive it. And then what? I asked. Wait it out, said Aaron, my son, and get a bigger sump pump before next time. We were both exhausted. Without him here, I'd have probably downed an Ambien by now, 10 milligrams, and called it a night. Après moi, le déluge. The nor'easter zapped Aaron's power right away, so he came over to his old man to stay warm and cozy. Here, the lights just flickered a few times, enough to have me reset the digital clocks for the various stationary devices. But that became tedious, so I let it be. Just like now, let the water rise. Some steps were going to be futile. That was all there was to it, when being in control was a lost cause against a muffled soundtrack of fierce winds. What if it reaches the first floor? I said. Nah, he brushed off. I bet it won't. We're lucky this didn't come down as snow. Staring at the tireless, sloshing, blackish groundwater seeping in with a distinct earthy algae smell, luck wasn't what I felt. Shutting the basement door made things easier to ignore, were it not for the still audible lapping, squishing evidence of a persistent, creepy home invasion. At 3:12, I was rattled by an ear-splitting thud. Fuck! What the fuck? I hopped up in fright and adrenaline, heart pounding. A tree, Aaron shouted in the hallway. I bet that fucking oak I asked you to have chopped. I tore open the door to the guest bath. Light still worked. The ceiling we saw ripped to pieces by a massive, callous branch of coniferous origin. But I didn't need to be right. I shone the phone up through the white crack in the attic. The spruce had torn a gaping black hole in the roof. Rain was whipping diagonally. There's blue tarp in the garage. Maybe we can. I heard it myself. I sounded whiny. Dad, no, Aaron said. Nothing we can do tonight. Water onslaught from up, down, and sideways. The barreling wind sounded more ominous, inspiring doubt if the windows would hold. I felt like hugging him, which wasn't our thing, but he allowed it for seconds. I had to work actively to steer my breathing. It's okay, he said, one big hand nestling on top of my head, as if to calm a spooked toddler or soothe a brooding German shepherd. All's okay, Dad. We both knew it wasn't. It wasn't to be like this, son in his upper 20s, toughened and protective of his father, well past 60. A minute later, I popped an Ambien. The outrageous white-yellow morning sun hit me like a stinging slap on a wet cheek and ear as I stood outside the house, trying to take in the offensively glistening, debris-strewn lakescape. What an audacity of brilliance on the heels of a hellish night. It was utterly blinding, infuriating. For no reason, I felt reminded of elementary school. Teachers were allowed to slap unruly kids where I grew up. Our humorless math teacher was Dr. Hairbrain because of 3 strands of hair that he had curated right above his crinkled forehead on his otherwise barren skull. After some inane infraction that for the life of me I can't remember, he randomly picked me out of a handful of loudmouths for his corporal sadism. He'd call you to the front of the class, would calmly ask you which side you preferred. I picked the left. So he began twisting your left earlobe with 2 fingers until ready to scream, and then smack your cheek. Quick, strategic, stunning. Even though you knew it was coming, the cheek would glow in a deep red through the period. I was upset, embarrassed, and for the rest of the grade, did my best impression of a model pupil. A humiliating injustice to remember for a lifetime. Why was I thinking this now? I was randomly, unjustly picked for punishment. Was that it? My earlobe just got twisted enough to make me squirm. While it could have been some other poor slobs, for whom I'd sincerely feel sorry before moving on my way. Aaron appeared in the front door. Here you are, he said, phone in hand, throwing me a puzzled look. He gently pulled me near by my arm to stabilize. I left a message for the insurance, he said. We better take pictures. Your main floor carpet, it's a goner. It's gonna get worse, I stammered. We need to always remember this. He shrugged. Well, yeah, for sure. Then with a sly grin. Things worth remembering don't have to hit you over the head, though. I wasn't sure what he meant. The good news is we rode through it, he continued. A bit messed up, but nothing we can't handle. And that's the end of the good news, I said, solemnly, for it was how I felt. His hand cupped mine. He looked in my squinting eyes. His voice had a calming tenderness. Hey, Dad, so far so good. Like we had taught him resilience along the way. Like we deal with things somehow. I was a mess, but so far so good.
Next, we have Hana S. Elysia. Hana is our first prize winner for our creative nonfiction contest. And this is what Clifford had to say about her piece. We are made to feel for the central character in this sad, moving work through the way place is evoked, both the place she is in and the one to which she aches to return. With a magical conciseness, this essay tells us in a few well-executed strokes where we are. The ending is perfect, its symbolism clear yet surprising, with its deft echo of what has come before. Hana is a professional dancer turned writer whose work has appeared in publications including Pacific Review, Trembling with Fear, and Confluence, where she was named the winner of the 2023 Confluence Award for Excellence in Creative Writing. Her Schwartz nonfiction piece, What They Call Me, is directly based on her mother's life after coming to the United States from Miyazaki, Japan. Welcome, Hana.
This is What They Call Me. All Yuki knows are the tall fields of Miyazaki and the buzz of cicadas in the summer. Kansas City has both of these, and yet they seem unfamiliar to her. No one here chants Buddhist prayers, but everyone here chants at her to leave, to go back to where she came from. She can't. She can only return to a cookie-cutter house that's barely furnished, to a mother she once thought was her distant aunt, and to a new stepfather with blonde hair and blue eyes, a stark contrast to her own. English, meanwhile, remains a block of lead on her tongue. She hasn't spoken Japanese freely in over 6 months, and the light, crackling feel of it fades from memory, like fireworks bursting at half power, half speed. When she'd first introduced herself at school, the kids snickered and the teacher sighed. There are no heads of black hair among the cluttered rows of desks, and for lunch, no rice. She's starting to forget the taste of that, too, along with its warm, whirling fragrance. Here, her stepfather says as he sets lunch onto the kitchen table one Saturday. Yuki stares down at a plate piled with lumpy white grains. It's the Uncle Ben's brand, he smiles, hoping to please her, and she returns a smile and thanks, hoping to do the same. The laughs of her family members left behind in Miyazaki echo with every bite, somehow mushy and hard at the same time, and the starchiness leaves her tongue coated in an oily combination of sugar and butter. More taste to drown out those she already struggles to remember. Who is Charlie? She then asks. Her stepfather pauses mid-chew. Who? Unable to find the right words, Yuki turns to her aunt, no, her mother, and asks her to translate. The boys on the bus call her Charlie, her mother says, tone flat and accent heavy. A fly has landed on one end of her flipped bob, crawling its way up to the puffy black bouffant atop her head. Yuki further explains that whenever the boys call her this, they all pretend to shoot her with a machine gun, like the soldiers on the news. Oh, her stepfather mutters. His gaze falls to his plate. It's nothing. Ignore it. Yuki looks to her mother for an answer, but receives a sharp shake of the head, and their food is promptly eaten in utensil-clinking silence. It's not until years later that Yuki discovers who Charlie is, or rather, what. After lunch, Yuki's mother tells her to get the laundry from the basement so they can hang the clothes to dry. Yuki had never even seen a washer back home, but it's not a luxury she can appreciate due to the darkness this one sits in. She peers down the long staircase and flicks on the light. Something slithers away at the bottom of the steps. Each board creaks as she slowly descends, splinters poking into her slippers, and then she runs past the mound of dirt in the corner where the basement remains unfinished. On top of the washing machine are 2 horizontal rollers. Those Yuki must crank by hand in order to wring out water from all the clothing. Her tan wrists move as quickly as she can while her gaze darts to the mound of dirt. She worries that whatever creature lurks down here will burst out of it and chase after her, but once the cranking is complete and her arms thoroughly ache, she hurries back up the staircase and shuts the basement door. Safe. Her mother slaps her in the backyard for not wringing out the laundry properly. Stupid girl, she spits. Why did I bother bringing you with me? That's something Yuki wonders as well. She stays outside by herself to watch the clothes sway on the line. There's so much space in this country, so much grass, so much sky. If she's not careful, they might suck the breath out of her. A breeze prickles her cheek, pink and stinging. Her eyelids flutter in the sun. That night, she realizes another luxury she fails to appreciate: having her own room. She used to sleep side by side on futons with her 3 siblings, their toes and hair comfortably tangled amid her father's snores, but now she lies alone in her bedroom as the air pulls taut with quiet. Even the cicadas seem to whisper. She still hasn't received a reply to the letter she sent to Japan, to the siblings who are really her cousins, the father who's really her uncle, and the woman she considers her true mother, who's really her uncle's wife. No blood relation at all. Come Sunday, Yuki's stepfather takes her fishing. Based on the red signs and wild brush, she's certain they're trespassing at this lake, but she doesn't ask why they don't visit the one nearby that's open to the public. A hooked worm wriggles on the end of her fishing pole while they sit on a rickety dock, and Yuki reels in a fish soon after, followed by 2 more. How are you doing that? Her stepfather says, joking about his Navy pride. She can guess what he said by the pat on her back. He spears another worm onto the hook for her, the fishing pole wobbling in her grip, but instead of lowering the worm into the water, she takes a moment to observe it. Its body writhes, tail curling upward. Mesmerizing, disgusting, a creature dug up from the dirt that can't communicate, can't return, and yet remnants of the soil still speckle its pink body. You gonna name it or something? Her stepfather chuckles. Yuki forgets to smile as she meets his blue eyes. Name? She glances back at the worm. It hovers above its own reflection as it continues to writhe, and the image burns into her mind before she finally gives an answer. Charlie, she utters, and she lets the hook drop.
And finally, and certainly not least, our creative nonfiction judge, Clifford Thompson. Clifford's books include What It Is, Race, Family, and One Thinking Black Man's Blues from 2019, which Time magazine named as one of the most anticipated books of the season, and which NPR called captivating. He is the author and illustrator of the graphic novel Big Man and the Little Man, which is, quote, slim in size and substantial in impact, in the words of the Times Literary Supplement. Welcome, Cliff.
For the last 25 years or so, I've been a regular contributor to the Three Penny Review, whose editor, Wendy Lesser, sometimes has what she calls symposiums in Three Penny. What she does is ask a handful of writers to all write up to 1,000 words on a topic, and the topic she gives us in a single word. So I'm going to read my piece from the Symposium on Anxiety. This is dedicated to anyone who's ever dreaded giving a public reading. In 1978, in my last year of junior high, I was editor of the school paper. Our school had a guidance counselor, a middle-aged Black woman, the whole school was Black, who was so calm and powdered and rouged and put together that I could never imagine her at home. One afternoon, the guidance counselor saw me in the hall, asked me to her office, and said that the next day, some students from a nearby elementary school were coming to visit. They would be attending our school the next year, and would I talk to them about what was involved in working on the school paper? I pictured myself sitting at a table with the guidance counselor and 3 or 4 sixth graders, answering their questions and generally dispensing wisdom from my Olympic perch. Sure thing, I said, and then I forgot about it. The next morning, I got to school and saw through the open doors to the auditorium that an assembly was about to begin. I went up to one of the boys stationed at the doors and asked what was going on. He handed me a mimeographed program. I opened it. There, in the slightly blurred periwinkle letters of those days, was my name. I looked through the doors again. The auditorium was full. Teachers and administrators from our school, teachers from the elementary school, and row after long, long row of sixth graders, all waiting to hear remarks to which I had given not 3 seconds thought. I walked in, said God knows what to our guidance counselor, and was directed to my place on the stage. Some adults spoke welcoming remarks. Then I heard my name. I went to the microphone. I opened my mouth, as curious as anyone else to hear what would come out. What came out were big, faltering circles made of words that repeatedly approached a point before angling away, moving in a different direction, and then coming back around again. The verbal equivalent of someone walking on unsteady legs around and around a field with a diminishing hope of finding what he has dropped in the grass. I remember, as I said the paper about 50 times, feeling the mood in the room, a puzzlement dangerously close to laughter. I came to the end of my talk, or anyway, I stopped talking and sat down. I felt numb. Maybe I'd made myself feel numb, which was infinitely preferable to what I would feel if I thought about what had just happened. That all took place in Washington, D.C. 3 decades later, living in New York and working as an editor, I labored at my own writing during my lunch hour and whenever else I had the chance. One day in the fall of 2009, a friend gave me the chance to read from my work at a local venue. I dreaded the event for weeks. Unlike most things I dread, this one turned out every bit as horrendously as I had feared. As I read aloud in that medium-sized room to maybe 3 dozen people, I seemed unable to fill more than about the top eighth of my lungs. I felt like someone trying to speak in a steady voice after running up 9 flights of stairs, and as painful as it was to do, it must have been worse to hear. When I sat down, a friend sitting behind me patted my arm, a well-intended sweet gesture that confirmed what a disaster had just taken place. What is it about large numbers of people that for some of us takes away our everyday confidence? Why was I, as a 9th grader, relaxed at the thought of talking to 2 or 3 students, but reduced to mumbling in circles about things I knew perfectly well when there were more listeners? Why, as an adult, was I confident enough to put pen to paper and submit the results to editors, but not confident enough to read it to an audience? Do greater numbers of people increase the chance that some of them, maybe many of them, will voice their disapproval, that we will be publicly exposed as the fraud that every person deep down knows himself to be? Maybe. But maybe, too, there is a clue to be found in the fact that since my 2009 reading debacle, I have read aloud from my work often enough that I now enjoy it, even look forward to it. And perhaps the answer has to do not so much with confidence in ourselves as with trust in others. This is a lesson I began to learn that day in 9th grade and had to relearn 3 decades later. That whatever unflattering things audiences may think, most have the grace and the consideration for a fellow human being not to say them. The last several years of public life have done much to weaken trust in other people. And yet, however hard that trust is to come by, it is even harder to do without.
That was so wonderful, Clifford. And as Karen said in the chat, the perfect thing to read at a public reading. Thank you, Cliff. We're so grateful to you for the time you took to support and select our winners and finalists for our contest. We thank all of our readers, all of our contributors. We're always so grateful to have you be part of our community. You are our community, so thank you for being here and supporting us. Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
thanks everyone.